Thank you, Daryl, for talking about why it's important for us to be able to help our youth to negotiate a crisis situation. Now we're going to talk about the things that they're going to need to be able to do, the skills that they'll need to develop to be able to do that successfully. And first up on this list of anger management skills is taking a time out. As far as the steps for timeout goes, the first thing that you want to do is what's called a safety stop. This is kind of like blowing a whistle or throwing a flag on the play. Everything stops so that way we keep things from going from bad to worse. And the second part of this is separation. We want to be able to remove that agitated youth or a staff member. Sometimes that's our staff gets a little bit agitated when the youth push limits and stuff like that. Sometimes our staff wants to show who's boss. So we want to separate them from the situation that is agitating them. We also want to remove them from the audience. I want you to think about what we learned in the adolescent brain development section, where it talked about the fact that the presence of their peers causes them to engage in more risk-taking behavior. So by removing them from that audience, maybe taking a walk, saying, hey, let's take a walk and figure this thing out, we give them that separation that they need to be able to process things more fully. And the last part of this is recognition. Being able to recognize what are my physical reactions that show that I'm getting angry, that I'm getting agitated, I'm getting flustered. It might be my heartbeat goes up, I feel a tightness in my chest, I'm feeling hot, I'm feeling flushed. Some people blush, they turn bright red when they get angry. Other people see red when they get angry. But just recognizing those physical changes. And then lastly, recognizing the behavioral reactions, the things that you see behaviorally, whether it's pacing, clenched fists, maybe raising the voice. Sometimes people get really loud when they get upset. And then there are other folks who just kind of stare off into space. They're just like, they get really, really angry. And so being able to recognize those things. Now, in order for timeouts to work in your program, you've got to have two things. The first thing you've got to have is everybody's got to be bought into the timeout concept. Everybody has to understand, and that's youth and staff alike, that this is important, this is a skill that we support, and we provide the opportunity for both youth and staff to utilize those timeouts effectively when it's necessary. The second thing is we all have to agree on how that's going to be implemented. Where can I go to take my timeout where it's going to be safe, where I'm not going to pose a risk to myself or others? When am I going to be allowed to take timeouts? I can't just say, oh, I want a timeout anytime somebody asks me to do something that I don't want to do. How long that's going to be and what that process is going to look like, who gets to decide when the timeout is over at that point. All right, the next skill we're going to talk about is having a calm self, being able to self-soothe, to calm yourself down. The first part of this is learning slow and deep breathing. If you don't breathe correctly, you can't move correctly, you won't be able to think correctly. It's physically impossible for you to be both agitated and relaxed at the same time. Now, one of the things that we teach in this module is a breathing exercise, just slowly breathing in and breathing out. I'm not going to do it in the video because if I do, you guys are all going to be sleeping in front of your computers. But holding that breath, concentrating on it, and then releasing it slowly, and doing this over a period of time and noticing the physical sensations in your body as you go through this process, and being able to relax. There's also an exercise called progressive muscle relaxation, where you focus on the different muscles in your body that are tense, and you tense them up, and then you relax as you control your breathing, so that you gradually allow yourself to relax physically in those areas where you carry your stress, whether it's your shoulders or your back or your, some people do it in their legs or in their neck, but becoming aware of that and being able to do it. Next thing for self-calming is humor. Now, humor is really effective. I myself like to use a little humor. If you can't laugh at yourself, who can you laugh at? But in teaching clients to do, it's really important to show that we're laughing with them and not at them. If a client who is agitated feels that you're mocking them, then that humor situation is not going to work well. Similarly, the next strategy on here is music. And they say music soothes the savage beast, when we get angry and upset. However, the music that the adolescent finds soothing and the music that we find soothing might be two very different things. So we need to have some maybe meeting ahead of time and figure out what is it that we can utilize musically that everybody's going to buy into, that's going to be appropriate and calming for folks. Recalling positive images, having kind of that little happy place that you go to when you get upset. Very, very important for being able to calm yourself down and get out of that situation that's agitating you in the here and now. And the last and perhaps the most important part is having supportive relationships, whether it's a peer support person or a staff support person, some type of a mentor, somebody that you can go to when you feel that you're in trouble, your lifeline, your phone a friend, whatever it is that's going to help you to sort of talk through that and give you the support that you need to get through a crisis situation where you feel like you're out of control. The next skill that we're going to be learning is problem-solving skills. In order to solve a problem, we have to be able to do the following things. First thing that we want to do is clearly define the problem. What is it that's bothering me? What is it that's getting me angry? What need is it that I'm trying to meet? In some cases, the kid might be, have missed his snack, and he may have a physical need that needs to be met, or he may not have gotten enough sleep. He may be on a new medication that isn't cooperating with him. So being able to get to the bottom of what that problem is, and then finding a list of options. And in that point, when you're coming up with a list of options, there's no right or wrong answers. You just want to brainstorm, you want to throw all those options out on the table, and then in the next step, you're going to look at those things and you're going to narrow them down based on two things. What's appropriate to do, right? Because it's not appropriate if one of your solutions to the problem is to punch somebody in the face or to fire a certain staff member that the kid doesn't like. That's not always an option on the table. So you want to narrow it down to what's appropriate and what's going to be effective, and based on those two things, the appropriateness, the effectiveness of this solution, you're going to choose an option and you're going to implement it. And then after you've implemented it, you're going to circle back with the youth and the staff that are involved in that situation, and you're going to examine the outcome. How effective was this really in solving the problem? And by the way, a critical skill that we're going to go into later in this module to make all of these things work is our active listening, because you're not going to be able to accomplish any of this stuff successfully unless you're able to communicate effectively back and forth between the youth and the staff. Very important. So in this next exercise, there is an incident report. This is an actual incident report from juvenile detention, right? And it says, when Kathy came back from the dining area after dinner, she was mad at Miss Smith because Kathy wasn't picked for chores. As she entered her room, she began hitting her fist against her hand and saying, "Bring that bitch back here." She kept saying this even after she was told this is inappropriate language, so she's been redirected for this. When she was informed that she was being given 36 hours of isolation, which we do not do in the state of Florida, right, for threatening a staff member, Kathy stood up on her bed and began yelling at Miss Smith, "You bitch, come in here. Stop backing up, bitch. I'll beat your ass." Now, Kathy was taken down, cuffed, and shackled. She did walk into segregation on her own. At the 6:45 check, she was informed that the staff member would return to shower Kathy later. She responded by telling the staff member to get out and leave her alone. Now, what's wrong with this picture? I want you to think about it for a second. In this particular instance, you've got somebody whose precipitating trigger was that she wasn't picked for chores. So she obviously needs to contribute. She obviously needs some attention, some validation, an opportunity to exhibit a pro-social behavior. How difficult would it have been to say, spend a few seconds with her and say, well, let's see if we can find some other type of chore for you to do back on the mod, or to validate that need to contribute, and see, if there's a healthy win-win type of situation for this. So what are some things that, you could do or say in this situation? And can you identify anything that might be contributing to her reacting this way to the situation? Could it be that she comes from a household where, if she didn't do her chores, maybe she was physically abused and she was acting out in that way? Maybe she was re-experiencing some trauma, or maybe she's one of these OCD people. You've met these people that have to clean a certain amount in order to feel okay about a situation, and they're not comfortable that an area is clean unless they clean it. So let's get to the bottom of it before we pass judgment. In the next slide, we see report 2, and it says, this morning room searches were conducted. When staff searched Jenny's room, several forbidden items were found. Jenny had 11 dirty, used feminine pads, 3 decks of cards. She had 4 books, 3 magazines, and 4 pairs of underwear, all hidden under her mattress. Now, this is a major infraction. After staff discussion, it was decided that Jenny would receive 36 hours isolation for contraband. Again, this doesn't happen in our state, due to several of the items having the potential of being used as a weapon. And it should be noted, one of the authors followed up with the reporting officer who acknowledged that he was both grossed out and angry when he pulled the used feminine pads out from under the mattress, which, you know, that's his issue, not her issue. And that's why he gave Jenny the 36 hours of isolation. So in other words, if it had been half-eaten sandwiches, if it had been dirty sweat socks, he wouldn't have reacted the same way, right? And I'm guessing he's not married. After 36 hours were up, Jenny was returned to the regular unit schedule with no follow-up discussion or mental health referral. Now, what's wrong with this picture? For those of us that have experience working with kids like this, what we know is that Jenny's behavior is classic of somebody that has been in a neglect situation. The hoarding, the inability to attend to our hygiene issues in an appropriate way, or to say, hey, I've got these things that need to be thrown away. Maybe there's some shame going on there. I'm not quite sure, you know, how the books and the magazines would be used as a weapon, or the underwear, but it's clear that this girl needs some type of help, some type of intervention, as opposed to straight discipline. By the way, putting her in isolation for 36 hours teaches her absolutely nothing new. There is no new learning that takes place in an isolation situation. So from a skill building perspective, this is not at all appropriate. All right? Now we're going to talk a little bit about crisis de-escalation, because while we do everything that we can to keep things from jumping off, it's really, really important that we have the skills necessary to respond appropriately once somebody gets a little bit off the chain or goes ham. Is that what they say now? Goes ham, right? In order for de-escalation to take place and be effective, it resolves a crisis through problem solving rather than by violence. The first thing that we want to do, if we can, if you know, we have that opportunity, we should all be familiar with the youth treatment plan. And if there's an anger management issue, what is called for in the treatment plan? Maybe there's a timeout, maybe there's a self-soothing, maybe we've agreed that there's like a music or an art activity or something. I've seen kids who escalate, said, you know, if I could just crochet a little bit, I'd feel better, or if I could draw a little bit. And so if we're in a position to do that, we want to do it. The next thing we want to do is we want to get the youth's attention. You know, we have to remove his focus from the thing that is agitating him or her, right? Whether it's a peer or it's a staff member or it's an activity that they don't want to participate, and get it on us so that we can continue on with that redirection process. And again, a really effective way of doing this is saying, hey, I can see you're upset. Why don't you take a walk with me and we'll talk about it? And if you start walking, 9 times out of 10, that kid is going to walk with you, even if he's like, hey, I don't want to walk right now. You just keep walking as you're talking to them, they'll try to keep up with you. And then you want to gain the youth's cooperation. You want to get him invested in the process. And you start that off by saying, hey, what do you really want? What do you need in this situation? Whether it's the ability to save face. You know, there are some kids that will be like, yeah, y'all lucky that Mr. Phil came here and got me out of this situation, because otherwise I'd be really tearing this place up. Or it may be the case that, you know, he just needs a break from a situation that's really stressful for him. And find out what it is that that youth is really responding to. Is the youth feeling disrespected? Or maybe it may be the case that in a very appropriate situation, what appears to be an appropriate situation, somebody has been victimized by someone that reminds her of somebody that has traumatized her or abused her in the past. And so we can't get to the bottom of it in the midst of that crisis situation unless we do those things. Next thing we want to do is keep it neutral. When we're responding to crisis, it's very important that we're aware of our own feelings. How am I going to help the youth to exhibit self-control and become self-aware if I myself can't control myself, I'm not aware of my own behavior? A lot of times kids just want to push other people's buttons, because if I'm upset and miserable, then I want everybody to be upset and miserable. I want everybody to be agitated. I want everybody to understand just how upset I am. So it's important that when we're responding, we have to be aware of our own posture, right? How we're standing. You know, we don't want to approach the youth with this kind of agitated, erect, you know, posture. And our own physical intervention policies call for very specific postures at different points of a crisis situation. We want to use those appropriately. We also need to be aware of our voice and how we utilize it, whether we're being soothing or we're being agitating. You know, sometimes the way we talk can make things worse instead of better, and the tone of our voice. You know, some people have gifts for, you know, sarcasm and snarkiness, and, you know, that's not the time to go up on somebody and say, oh, I see you're having a bad day today. How can I help you with that? You know, you want to make sure that you want to do it in a way that's going to be supportive and reassuring. You want to remove the audience. We talked about how important it is to give that youth an opportunity for a face-saving resolution, because it's really important to them not to lose status with their peer group in the process of a crisis or an out-of-control situation. Equally important in these situations is nonverbal communication. We have to be aware of what our body language is, so we want to have an open, non-confrontational stance. We don't want to come up on the youth with our chests all bowed out and our arms crossed and everything like that, or our fists clenched. We want to make sure that we're open, we're non-confrontational, we're listening to them, we're letting them know that we're there to help. Physical proximity is also important. You don't want to be so close to a kid that you're up in his grill, you're in his personal space or her personal space, because that will make things worse. And you don't want to be so far away from them, you know, standing across the room, that it's like, hey, I'm really concerned about you over there. You want to make sure that you're close enough to them that they get the fact that you're personally interested and invested in helping them, but not so close that you're in that distance where they could reach out and touch you with their arms or with their legs. So avoid invading personal space. Lastly, it's important to be aware of your facial expressions, okay? It's important that, you know, your face communicate that you're interested and you're caring and you're concerned. You know, what you don't want to do is come up on them and, you know, have that look where you're just really intense or judgmental, or just like, you know, what is your major malfunction? Sometimes you can communicate that non-verbally. Eye contact is also important. If you look at the picture here, it's kind of cute because we think of eye contact as a good thing, but sometimes when you're staring somebody down, you know, do you see how she's leaning in with her eye contact? It's almost like assaultive, like she's mean-mugging her. They look like two fighters at the weigh-ins getting ready to square off with each other, giving each other the stink eye. So it's important that we're aware of that. Equally important is understanding that when we're using verbal redirection, our voice is our instrument, all right? So the same phrase can communicate totally different things depending on how loud you say it, what your tone is of voice, and how fast you say it. So for example, if I say, hey, who left this book here, I'm communicating one thing, versus if I say, who left this book here, right? I'm saying something very different. The phrase, may I help you? May I help you? Simple, non-threatening and everything, versus, may I help you? Right? You're communicating that I really don't want to help you. I'd really rather be anywhere else than helping you. And have a nice day. Have a nice day is good. Versus, have a nice day. So be aware of how it's not what you say, but how you say it that gives the most impactful message when we're communicating. Lastly, but by no means least, and for me this is really important, to slow down. Because the youth that we work with are impulsive. They don't think before they act. They have a real hard time, you know, understanding what's going on around them and giving themselves the opportunity to react. Simply slowing things down can be an effective intervention. It gives those kids an opportunity to talk about their feelings. And so when you ask a kid a question, you're intervening, be quiet for a minute and give them an opportunity to respond. Give them a chance to find their words and express it. Allow them to think through options, allow them to weigh their consequences, and if you can, you know, get them to go with you, you know, to take a walk, you know, outside of that agitated area, it gives them a chance to stop, to talk it through, to wait a little bit, think about, you know, what they do, settle down, maybe utilize some of those breathing exercises, and then to come up with an action that's going to help us to solve the problem and make it better instead of worse. The last thing I'm going to talk to you about is shh, being quiet, talking softly. If you talk softly, the other person will often automatically, subconsciously just lower their voice to match your tone, right? You want to speak calmly. You want to use soothing words versus confrontational words. Like, you know, are you having a problem today? Ask an open-ended question using your motivational interviewing skills and give them a chance to respond instead of saying, what is your major malfunction? That's not very, that's confrontational. It's not very soothing. And then provide them reassurance. You know, it's okay to say things to them like, hey, this is okay. You know, we'll get through this, right? This is not the end of the world that we're going through right now. I know you're upset. I can see that you're upset. But I promise you, if we work together, we can get you through this, and this doesn't have to be a major issue. And then when you're giving somebody who is agitated instructions for de-escalation purposes, you want to make sure that the instructions that you provide to them are clear and simple. It's not the time to give them a complicated 3 pages of you're going to have to fill all this paperwork out for your treatment because it's clear that you still have a problem with anger. You want to say, hey, why don't you put that down? Why don't you take a walk with me? Why don't we focus on our breathing? Clear, simple instructions, which I as a guy appreciate greatly, make all the difference in the world when it comes to dealing with this. And next we'll talk a little bit about active listening.